Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight here in Suffolk for braving this brutal heat wave to be here, showing up on behalf of democracy. We really appreciate it. So tonight's really just going to be a continuation of something we've been doing here at the Union really for the last few years, ramping up ever since the elections, holding conversations in towns across the United States, across this great country, just talking about local issues, and especially in places that don't get as much attention from the Democratic Party and from big media, just hearing from regular folks and talking about issues that matter to voters like you. So we really appreciate you being here. Without further ado, I'm going to kick it off. We've got our president of the union, Lee Galen, right here. And then one of our local super volunteers, retired Lieutenant Colonel of the United States Army, member of the local Suffolk Democrats, and just all-around great guy, Bill Robinson. And they're going to be talking about issues that matter to folks here in Virginia's District 2. So thank you.
No, thanks, John. Thanks, everybody, for watching, and thanks for everybody who came. So let's start with you, Bill. So what'd you do in the Army?
Well, I was an infantry officer.
Here we go.
I was an infantry officer. I served in a lot of different places. Alaska, 172nd Light Infantry Brigade, Fort Ord with the 7th Infantry Division.
Out in the middle of nowhere.
We can even mention that because I was involved in the ramped up for the LA riots.
Oh, sure.
So that's kind of related to what's going on now. And I also served with the 82nd Airborne Division, and then I was an instructor at the U.S. Army Infantry School. And after that, 20 years as a DoD civilian, so I'm a double dipper, as they used to say. And now I've been retired for about 3 years.
Oh, you got it. They tell me you have to talk into the microphone. It's always a big secret. So tell us what's going on down here. What is going on in southeastern Virginia, here in Virginia's 2nd Congressional District? I drove in a little bit earlier today. It is hot out there. We're right here. We're on a couple of rivers and near the Atlantic and Chesapeake Bay. Beautiful country. So tell us, what are the issues that folks down here are facing that you think probably do not get enough attention outside the immediate area?
Well, first and foremost, Suffolk, Isle of Wight, and the rest of CD02 are part of a maritime area. And Hampton Roads, a lot of people have heard of Norfolk, but Hampton Roads is a much bigger area. There's Portsmouth, Chesapeake, Hampton, Newport News, the famous shipyard is there. And so the tariffs are a big deal. The tariffs are killing shipping, the shipping industry, but also because it's a port area, there are over 240 nodes throughout Virginia that connect into the port for basically loading or unloading a big container ship. They build them incrementally up to the ship and then distribute them incrementally up to the ship. The second thing is our area is an agricultural area. We're still very dependent on agriculture, and a lot of our products are dependent on foreign sales. So soybeans, corn, just like someone in the Midwest, we grow a lot of those grain crops and other crops that people export, but we also raise livestock. A lot of our farmers raise pork. We are in Isle of Wight County home to the oldest pork operations in the United States. Literally, the colonists started raising pork and making hams. And that's where the famous Smithfield hams are.
Oh, sure.
And then, so we have both farmers and agribusiness here that are suffering from the tariffs. Additionally, we have the world's largest Navy base here at Norfolk Navy Base, but it's really a complex of bases. But there's also Fort Eustis, which is Joint Langley Air Force Base. So this is an especially large military area. So we have a huge number of active duty military families and veterans. Our ratio of veterans to other areas is about 3 to 1. So veterans are really affected by the cuts to the VA. But also that's where we get to talk about the cuts to Medicaid. People think cuts to Medicaid are just affecting, poor people go to the emergency room, to the doctor, and people have money paid for them. But that's not true. The way the budget's built, it's all interconnected. Those guys in what used to be smoke-filled rooms, now I guess they eat fruit, but they, have different things in different parts of the budget. So when they cut people at Housing and Urban Development that process homeless set-asides for veterans, homeless veterans don't get housing. When they cut Medicaid benefits that are set aside for veterans, poor veterans and their families don't get medical help. And that ripples over into things like the elderly. Our area, particularly South Side, happens to be a huge area for retirement communities.
Sure, because so many people retire from the military.
Well, even the middle class is dependent, people don't realize this because the way that we set things up, is dependent on Medicaid to pay for much of their retirement care. Medicare and most insurances don't pay for many pieces of your long-term care. The way most operators do things, you have to get into Medicaid. And if we lose Medicaid, there's going to be a huge coverage gap. And a lot of these smaller, more affordable homes are going to close. That means middle-class people, particularly the working middle class, they go on. And so we're starting to see a lot more people who were on the fence, independents. We really had a lot more interest in people saying, I'm not so happy about what's going on now. Who may not have felt the pain before. And we're even having a lot of people now come in with Trump regret, finally. It just took a while for the light on on. And honestly, I do not resent that. I'm not one of these guys who's angry and sits around and says, wait and vote for me. I have too many family members in South Alabama, East Tennessee, Georgia, who they were so enculturated to that, saying I'm a Republican, I'm a conservative. It's just part of how they were born. And how do you change the way people grow up? You just keep talking to them. And sometimes they have to fall out of here, find out for themselves. And I found that being willing to just listen and talk reflectively, you got to let them reach it for themselves.
Well, yeah, there's a bunch of stuff you said there. First part is, no, is that, I found personally, Bill, that if someone does something that you disagree with and it works out badly for them, and then you whack your finger at their face and say, I told you what was going to happen, they don't tend to take kindly to that. That's not a basis for a conversation, but B, any sort of, short or long-term relationship. You can't build that way, right? You and I were talking about this a little bit before we got started, was, how do we gotta stretch out that tent, right? We gotta make a bigger door. And part of it's gonna be people we didn't think were gonna arrive, who started knocking. But I want to talk about a couple of the issues in particular. So let's talk about the tariffs, because I think it's important to understand that while the tariffs have been all over the place since Liberation Day, early April, and we've seen, we saw a massive sell-off in the stock market that day. The fact is that there's still a baseline 10% tariff on everybody. Some are a little bit higher, but everybody's at least at 10%, which is, to your point, if that's a cargo ship with, containers they hold, but you increase each of that by 10%. Well, if it was $100, for one container times 10, now it's, 1,000 containers. Well, it starts to add up. And of course, as we know, all of those things, I think, have to get paid right before the stuff can get off the boat. So somebody's got to pay for it, whether or not that's the shipper or that's the person who's taking possession of it. And that's all going to get passed on to us. And to your point, with a large military community, yes, they don't get paid particularly well to begin with, right? And then you have a large retiree community. So all of these things they seem incremental, but those increments become additive and then they become overwhelming pretty quickly.
Yeah, that's very true. And as an aside on the tariffs, people also forget that the Trump administration developed a penalty for people who not just buy Chinese-made ships, not just for the Chinese ships, operating ships, but anybody who owns a Chinese ship, if they try to deliver cargo, they are fined with a penalty. Well, the problem is, because of the combination of massive government investment, a very long coastline, and a lot of people that make for cheap labor, the Chinese sell some of the best, reasonably best, affordable ships in the world. So they are the vast majority of the world's merchant fleet when it comes to container ships and bulk cargo, et cetera.
So I don't think we really mean that.
We don't make squat. We're down like number 74 or 75. And, but we're in like 0.04%, I think I read the other day. And the point is, we're penalizing people for delivering goods, irrespective of whether there's a tariff on that particular country they're coming from or not. And tariffs have proven time and time again not to work. Ultimately, all tariffs do is reduce competition and punish the consumer.
Well, the whole idea of reshoring industries and that idea is something that sounds good. And do we think that we want more people building things here? I mean, I don't know that we need that economic argument, but the point is that doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen next week. It doesn't happen next month. It doesn't even happen next year. First, the company has to decide they want to do it. Then they have to do it. And the problem is that even if they decide to do it here, the stuff they need to make whatever it is they're making, you can't get here. So you still have to bring it.
That's right. I mean, Adam Smith, like the Bible, is often cherry-picking this quote. The tariffs don't look at history. People love tariffs, don't look at history. And they don't look at the fallacies. The positive effect of tariffs under G.H.W. Bush for the steel industry was short-term, and it did more damage to other industries in the economy than it did good for Pittsburgh.
Which now does not make steel.
Which doesn't make steel. Which doesn't make steel. It was just a band-aid. And that's the best you can hope for with tariffs. And when you trigger trade wars over the long term, they often lead to shooting wars.
Right. Yeah. Well, wars of any kind.
Yeah.
Not typically right. But speaking of wars, so let's talk about the veterans. So you said the Norfolk Naval Base is one of the largest, if not the largest naval base in the world, and Langley and all the others. And so folks, obviously they serve like you did, and you're more from here originally, but you serve a lot of people, I assume that there's a big veteran population in a lot of areas that have big military bases, right? Whether it's North Carolina or Georgia, wherever it is. And so now those people want to stay here, they're counting on the VA. And this is one thing that I've been a little bit disappointed about, is that we've seen a lot of complaining about cuts to the VA. We haven't heard, from my perspective, enough demands on what should happen, which is those cuts should be, those cuts should be reversed, that personnel should be rehired. I was listening to a story the other day that I think that for those of us who spend any amount of time paying attention to it, which is not most Americans anymore, people are, it's the VA, it's government health care. But the truth is, the VA tends to have a very high rate of approval amongst the residents that use it.
Yes, and they're making enormous progress.
Right, and again, it's I think it is, outside the Pentagon itself, I think it's the largest federal agency. I think that's one of the largest budgets. And the thing that I think about is, maybe at the beginning of your service, right, or maybe a little bit after, for a long time, up until 1973, we had a draft, right? We had a draft, so lot of people serve. We've been an all-volunteer force since then. We've come off of true 20-year wars, but fought by a very narrow slice of the population, and the burden felt by that narrow slice of the population and their families. And that's one part of it, though, it's frankly unconscionable to me. It's sort of what else can we ask of these folks? What we asked you to go to war, you went to war. We asked you to bleed, you bled. We asked you to die, you died. We asked you to come home. Good luck. I mean, that just doesn't seem right to me.
Well, as a veteran, but also as the child of a veteran who died partly from complications, and luckily they passed, the new laws that he had issues with his lungs. They go back to exposure to chemicals in Vietnam, and not just the bombs and bullets, but even the training in the military is dangerous. Even the bases our families have lived on, we found out are dangerous in many cases. But people do it because they love their country. They love what it stands for. The officer corps especially, we swear an oath to the Constitution. We believe in the Constitution. And people do it gladly, but there's I like to call it a covenant between the American people and the people who are willing to go out there and risk their lives. That you protect us, you put your lives on the line for us, and we will make sure you are cared for. The modern idea of it goes all the way back to Abraham Lincoln after the Civil War. So, but even after the Revolutionary, Washington and the other officers fought to get benefits for their soldiers, and they paid benefits to soldiers after every war. And to start reducing those benefits, to start treating veterans as an unnecessary expense is an enormous risk to our country. Because if the country starts sending the signal that we don't value your service, people will then ask, why am I serving? And if we can't get people to serve voluntarily, then we're faced with the choice of a draft or not having a military.
Can you imagine if we tried to raise the draft?
No, I can't.
I can't.
Although, that's a big debate. The conversion to a semi-professional and then a professional army was part of the Republic for the Romans, so it's something to think about. But, it sort of segues into what's going on right now. I've said before, it should scare every American, not striking Iran was smart. Was it done in accordance with it was slow-rolled anyway. It was time to do all the right things constitutionally. So we have a president who's willing to elect the soldiers, but at the same time, employ them in LA, employ them, based on executive orders, without consulting Congress, without respecting the posse comitatus. He's willing to basically go to war without getting congressional authorization. We see all these other flagrant violations of the Constitution. That's why I look now and say, I listened to Joe Walsh a couple of times when we talk. I say, I don't think right now, because party membership is not permanent. That right now, there is no other choice than to support the Democratic Party. I don't care if you're a progressive or a conservative. If you want to conserve the most fundamental aspect of what it is to be a little R Republican, little F Federalist, and little D Democrat,
and little L liberal.
and libertarian.
Right.
You know, how can you look at what's going on with ICE, what's going on with disrespect for gay rights, LGBTQ, and call yourself a classical libertarian?
Well, I mean, I think that's one of the things that we forget. First of all, Joe Walsh was a very MAGA member of Congress from Illinois, and ran against Trump in 2016, presidential primary. Obviously didn't win. Then left the Republican Party and just recently decided to join the Democratic Party. And when I interviewed him, it was probably 2 or 3 weeks ago, he said, "Look, I'm still a conservative. My beliefs, my core hasn't changed, but I just wasn't going to be part of that." And, you know, Joe's one of those guys who he gave it all up. He gave up elected office. He gave up his career prospects. He gave it all up to be what he thought he needed to be. I hope we have more voices like him. I think we will as time goes on. Unfortunately, you know, we got red and blue, right? We only got 2 teams that take the field. So at some point, you're going to have to know a jersey that you might have never thought of. But I would also say this is one thing that we talk about a lot, you know, in 2022 and in 2024, as far as the union is concerned, which is we don't have to agree on everything. We only have to agree on one thing. The problem is that it's sometimes going to be really hard for folks to be agreeable to that one thing because all of the other stuff gets in the way. Well, what about this? What about that? What about that? And what I'm trying to say, with all due respect, is none of the rest of that is going to matter or it's going to get fixed if we don't solve problem one. Problem one is the first thing, and then have to have an argument with you. My guess is our arguments are probably more about methodology than outcome, right? But it's going to have to take a lot of people. And look, I fully admit once in a while I'm short on grace. I get it. I'm not proud of myself for that, but I think that the more of us who are having those conversations, who can find common ground, which is frankly, there's a reason it's called common ground. It's not uncommon ground. The better off we'll be, but those are things that have to happen in rooms like this and in conversations like this. It's not easy, it's not fast, sometimes it's not sexy, but it's the work of that community building and getting people back together, which in person, I really do believe is a key part.
You're exactly right. I mean, and it's human nature to want to continue to refine and debate the finer points. But I think if you look at the return of Trump, it's very easy to realize, or perhaps the lesson, we should always talk about lessons learned. The lesson learned is if we do not preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States, both as a framework for a self-limiting government that also protects the rights of its citizens, and second, as a statement of the fundamental rights of its citizens and the balance of power between them. People forget this, both the branches of government and the federal state governments, and then to a certain extent the local governments, because of requiring the state constitutions to reflect the federal constitution. Nobody's going to get what they want except the Trumpists.
Right. But that's the reason why, I mean, John and I were in New Jersey and Pennsylvania last week, and I've been lucky enough to travel so many places across the country. That's always a good reminder is that, you know, we spend time on our phones and watch people on YouTube, and we live our lives in the towns in which we reside.
Mm-hmm.
And the best things will happen to us here with our family or friends, worse things too, but also the most annoying things, which is if government isn't working at the local level, it's immediate and it's noticeable, right? If you put the water on and nothing comes out, that's a problem. If you flip the light switch and the lights don't come on, if you look out your window, the garbage hasn't gotten picked up, people get upset and that's where, for me, we have to, that those things happen at the county level, at the city level, at the state level. Those are the places where the most immediate positive impact can happen for people. The federal part of it, especially with someone like Donald Trump, is absolutely crucial. But for us, right, I'm gonna be in Blacksburg tomorrow night, doing a town hall with the House of Delegates candidate. Right, those races are incredibly important because that's gonna have a real, almost immediate impact on people's lives.
You are exactly right, and I tell everybody who's like, oh, I'll wait till the federal election, only wants to talk about the federal election. Virginia and Pennsylvania, and these are bulwark states. Everybody likes to talk about bellwether. Yeah, it sends a signal, but they are bulwark. And if we don't have a governor and state executives and a state legislature that's strong enough to stand up to the Trump administration, we may not have fair elections next year. And we have 18 months and 2 elections before we may not be able to ever dislodge the Trump administration.
Well, yeah, so we got Virginia, obviously we have races here, so we were in New Jersey, and we were in Pennsylvania. There are only 3 Supreme Court races, retention races there. I think it's a 6-1 or 6-2 majority for the Democrats. So,
I've got great friends in Carlisle.
okay, I'm sure. The first campaign I ever ran was in York, right?
Yeah, it was a cool day.
It was a long time ago. I had a lot more hair on my head, a lot less on my face, but I lost terribly. But sometimes losing.
Yeah, but it's a cool place.
It is a cool place. And I think that's right. And the things that we will do, the things that we will build, and the things that we'll learn this year are going to be directly applicable to the races that we have next year. Look, as you talked about, everybody talks about the federal races, and everybody talks about 2026, but the other part too is that we're on the beach here as far as democracy is concerned in a lot of these states, right? A lot of these places have gone uncontested for a long time. We don't have any more space to give. We don't have any more, ground. We're going to draw a line in the sand and say this is where we're going to win or we're going to lose.
That's right. This is Heartbreak, Crossroads, St. Vith, and that's gone. We hold here this year, start advancing so that we can beat them next year.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting you say that because the advancing part too is important. It's not enough. It's enough to say that Donald Trump is bad and wants to do bad things. It's not enough for the voters. They didn't buy it last year, right? It wasn't enough for enough people. Too many people say, "Oh, that was why he won." A lot of people said, "Doesn't matter to me," or it's not going to change. And I think that's the one thing we've seen too is that how many people have separated themselves from the system. Doesn't matter. Doesn't work. It works. And we got a little bit of a hum, but you don't worry. We're just going to keep on fighting through it. So anyway, there we go.
Yeah, so you're exactly right. There are always people everywhere to stay on. And there are people who are so hardcore MAGA or just so ingrained with the self-identification of Republican that we aren't going to change their minds. But we are doing everything we can. That's why I'm so appreciative of your organization and the others that are out there trying to work at the grassroots level. Because I think Tip O'Neill was right about that. All politics is local.
And if you've ever spent time around candidates for city council, it's as nasty as it does anywhere.
It's our
neighbors.
That's right. But I see what's going on in local politics, and I see that if we don't run, we can't win. If we don't vote, we can't win. All these platitudes, they're true.
No, in 2022, turnout nationally was 44%.
Yeah.
That's not going to get done. That's not going to get done. You get a point higher nationally, things start to change pretty dramatically. But the work to get to that has to start yesterday.
Yeah.
Election, as much as anybody wants to believe it, the time for electioneering is not the Tuesday after Labor Day.
That's right.
It's now. People are on vacation, or no one's tuned out. That's not a thing. Everybody's too tuned in, unfortunately, for all of us. But we should not assume that just because somebody went on vacation with their family, that they're not still completely plugged in.
That's right. But I think Sometimes it's easy to live in the world of social media and other media. I love reading Substacks and other publications online, etc. But when I get out and talk to people in my county, on Juneteenth, I went out in the heat with my buttons, and handed out cards. And when I talk to people, I can actually get more positivity out of that because people are talking to me now. They're not shying away from the Democratic realm because more and more people are saying, I want to hear about this. And the other thing is women, progressives, and African Americans have been carrying the Democratic water for a long time now. So we got to listen to them.
Yes.
There's a lot of people now who are coming in that are outside the party or conservatives who sort of waving the wings in the party or moderates who want to criticize them. But if you're not going to join your local committee and do 1 hour a month to help, if you're not going to join online and boost them, don't criticize them. Because the people who are passionate and get out there and work at the grassroots level, they're the ones that are going to mobilize voters. Commercials don't motivate voters.
Commercials are almost exclusively designed to turn voters off.
Yes,
It's
it's negative, but it's been proven. People who sit down and write a handwritten postcard, people who knock on doors, people who stand in front of grocery stores, people who go to farmers markets and do things like that. That's what mobilizes voters.
Right. Well, that's democracy in action.
That's real democracy.
Right. Because democracy is not just, we vote every 2 years. That's not what democracy is. That's logistics.
Yeah,
That's a process. The aspect of democracy you're talking about is citizens talking to citizens in a place and a time that isn't necessarily dependent on an election.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't start that conversation now, you're certainly not going to have it 2 weeks before election.
And I was fortunate. I came from a family that did things that some people might think were a little dirty. I can remember sitting around and my grandfather, my father, and my uncle talking about civic virtue. As a couple, just sitting around after dinner, talking about civic virtue and what it meant and why it was important. And, I still believe that that's possible to promote civic virtue.
It is a right practice.
We are very out of practice. That muscle is flattening. And
I'm not going to take it personally.
I'm not. You're doing it. But there are so many people that don't want to do anything wrong. And if you don't get involved where you live, it's something. It's going out and coaching.
It's 100%. We're going to shake it.
You're not doing things right. All you do is treat your suburb as a bedroom community, and your family does everything else elsewhere. Then your mind is not correct.
Well, and as you noted, with whether or not it cuts to veterans benefits or Medicaid, or we saw that it was back in March, the Agriculture Department cut about $1.5 billion in funding for local farms and food pantries. It's going to have to be one heck of a mutual aid network that we're building, that we need to build now, because there's going to be a lot of people hurt for through no fault of their own, just for ugliness, and we can't allow that.
Well, and at least for the next 2.5 years to flush the system, and rebuild it maybe 3 years, the states are going to have to pick up what they can. Fortunately, Virginia is a relatively wealthy state, and if we elect a Democratic administration and a Democratic House and Senate, we can do that.
Well, from your lips to God's ears. Okay, does anybody have any questions? Anyone? No. All right. Hey, easy.
We're
So you have a question?
Well, thank you.
Actually,
Yes, sure, please.
my question is about you, the union.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me more about the organization? When I see the union, I think of unions.
Sure.
Is there any relation
I mean, I think we're probably partnered with some labor organizations, but, I think it more, well, let me just say this, the union can mean whatever you want it to, right? It's a broad term, but I think it's the idea, the Union Army, right?
That's the way I thought it when it was first.
Yeah, the United States, right? All of these things, union, one, and that's where we all have to come from. I mean, we are technically nonpartisan, but I call us an Airbnb for politics. If you are not a Republican anymore, if you're an independent who's looking to get involved, if you're a registered Democrat, you're like, Democratic Party's not really, come with us. I think a lot of the things, unfortunately, we're doing, and Bill, you probably dealt with this, is we're doing because, frankly, the Democratic Party hasn't done it. Or at least I spent a lot of time on the road last fall, and I saw way too many places in far too many states that were supposed to be so important, they were existential. We call them existential states, where clearly the work had not been done. And we just cannot afford that. So whether or not it's meetings like this that people together, whether or not it's our 100+ partner organizations, who are out there, registered voters, making phone calls. We had a meeting, we thought it was going to be a town hall meeting. It turned into a work session in Philadelphia last weekend, where we started plotting out what we're going to do to help the Supreme Court races there this fall, because again, that's three liberal judges that if they win, a lot of the things that Pennsylvanians, I don't want to say take for granted, but count on will remain in place, and if not, it could be a much different thing. And in a state like Pennsylvania, like Virginia, you don't want the bad guys in charge, right? That doesn't work out well for anybody. And then ultimately, as I talked about, at the local level, we want to go help recruit candidates for 2026. In 2024, 71% of available races up and down the ballot were unopposed. Whoever the incumbent was didn't have an opponent. In 3/4 of those races, it was the Democrats who didn't put somebody up. We cannot have that. The country is, the red is spreading, and we have to, as Bill said, we have to put a stake in the ground and say we're not going to stop it. So for us, it's the step one is getting people together. Step two is finding volunteers and leaders like Bill. And step three is finding people who will step up and say, yes, this year I will put my name on the line, literally, and stand for election. Yes.
I'd just like to share an experience we had last September. We went to, fortunate enough to go to France. I have an uncle there. In fact, my father's family, they had 4 brothers, and they all served in World War II. And one of them went to Normandy. I was named after him, Alan Holden. And he died there in the Jeep. I think in Atlanta. And we went to Brittany Cemetery, American Brittany Cemetery. And there's around 4,400 graves in that cemetery. I don't think anybody from our family had been there in 80 years to pay their respects to my uncle. So it was such a touching thing to see all these sacrifices that were made. And it just makes you appreciate what they did. And now to see what we're doing as a nation, especially being affected by Trump and his policies and what he's doing, it just makes me sad, because that was, you could just feel the spirit of these men who went there and died. Many of them young men didn't know why they were there or what, but they rose up and served their country. And so now we've got a situation where we have a president in every aspect of life. And those he touches also, he is a destroyer. He is somebody who does not care about freedom. It's all about power. And that's what we're fighting against. So when I was there, we had 2 women who were in the cemetery. They were French, and they came over and asked us if we were from America. I said, yes, we are. We're here to pay respects to my uncle. And they really gave us a hug and thanked us profusely about the sacrifices that were made. So now we've got to stand up as a nation, because even as Hitler did after World War I, he created mass hysteria. He really folded the vast majority of the people in the country, thinking that he had the ideas that would take them out of the Great Depression. And what it was, it took them out of the Great Depression into a war that killed 62 million people. So that's my spiel. So I share that with you.
Absolutely. I mean, I'll tell you this, Bill, and you can appreciate this as a retired infantry officer. If you go to Omaha Beach at low tide, and you see the quarter mile of beach those guys had to traverse to get to the seawall, and you look at it and you say, only crazy people would do this, right? And they did. And as you talk about, sir, and then you go to the cemetery, and if you don't go to the cemetery in Normandy, and your breath isn't taken away, and your heart isn't full, and you're just, the tears aren't streaming down your face, I don't know what you but I mean, to me, it was one of the, my father and I got to go, it was the year that they dedicated the field grade, or was the company grade officers, it was Dick Winters was the statue. It was everything it should have been. It was June 6th, as you said, the French were incredibly gracious. And it was sunny, and then the wind blew at 40 miles an hour. It was a torrential downpour. Temperature dropped about 30 degrees. But it was one of the most incredible and impactful things I've ever had the opportunity to do. And I think Bill too, just like with you and so many who have served, they gave everything without second thought. That ramp dropped and they went. And we're not asking that much people, right? We're not asking them to get in a landing craft. We're not asking them to jump out of an airplane. We're not asking them to fly a bomber over Berlin with 88mm flak shooting up at them. We're asking them to make a phone call. And I think sometimes I think sometimes there needs to be a little bit of righteous indignation. You want what you got to earn it. Right? All of this has been paid with a blood debt. And I think a lot of times, frankly, we take it for granted. I think that's how we got here.
I remember, even when I was a young child in magazines, different versions of an article that talked about the price paid by many of the signers of the Declaration of Independence, the members of the Continental Congress. And many of them lost everything. Some of them literally gave their fortunes to save the U.S. from bankruptcy. But all we're asked to do is have the courage to say, I'm not going to vote for Donald Trump.
Well, and as I noted, I'm going over to Blacksburg tomorrow, and on the way, I'm going to stop at Appomattox. And it's another place where 600,000 Americans died in the war. And the end of the war there around Fredericksburg and around Richmond was incredibly bloody. Because Grant knew this is what I have to do. This is how we're going to win the war. And it was a bloodbath, and it was awful. But if we wanted to win, this was the sacrifice that had to be made. He was willing to do what needed to be done. Abraham Lincoln was willing to do what needed to be done. But obviously, he sacrificed his life for us, to so many of them. And again, we're not asking for any remotely kind of that sacrifice. We're asking for maybe a couple hours a week. And maybe not even a couple hours a week. Maybe a couple hours a month would do it. But if we had millions of people working a couple hours a month, that adds up in a hurry.
I know. And, being in Virginia, I'm proud of Virginia now. And I actually grew up in Georgia. I'm a Georgia Bulldog of the University of Georgia. But
I went to the University of Texas at Austin.
But
That's a football.
But now I'm inculcated into the Virginia citizenry, and where else can you drive and go to the first colony in the United States, the first assembly at the House of Burgesses there in Williamsburg, where we fought and won the last major battle of our war of independence. And you just keep driving where we defeated the main army of the Confederacy, where we broke them, etc. And you can just see all of that on your way to our nation's capital. And the Monitor Merrimack right out here in Frederick, Virginia, I guess if you're Confederate leanings, but it's all right there. I mean, you can walk out of my house, walk to the end of the street and see where that battle was fought.
Oh, that's pretty cool. Yeah, no, I mean, I grew up in Northern Virginia, so, yeah, you know.
All about Manassas and
Yeah,
Fredericksburg.
Manassas, well, we went to Williamsburg, we did all that. I have family over in Bedford.
Yeah.
So,
That's an amazing monument.
you know, I'm starting early tomorrow. So I have to make my way west. I have like 8 different stops. So, all right, well, listen, I want to thank you so much.
No, it's been my pleasure. And,
Thank you so much for hosting us. Thanks everybody for coming out. John, as always, thanks for setting everything up. Guys, if you're out there to join union.us, please sign up, guys. We need your help. We are on the road here. I think I'm going to be, well, we're going to Blacksburg and we're going to be up in Northern Virginia with Network Nova folks, and then we'll be on the road the rest of the summer as well. Bill, thank you so much. Everybody else, thanks for coming out.